All right. So what I've got on the agenda for today's August profiling call is a follow-up and kind of more like an update on a topic that has gone now both to the profiling and to the governance streams on deprecation versus withdrawal. So I've got a quick update on that. I've got, I thought it might make sense for us to do some application of some of the changes that we've been discussing in previous profiling calls that we've kind of have conclusive actions on for like the part of our kind of calls that are not just the, decisioning on changes to prepare for the next 1.2 update, but also to prepare for and actually get those changes put in with the time that we have. And then there was, it looks like a few on observation results that haven't been applied yet, so we can put those through together. And then one of the things I kind of hinted at the last governance call is that, as we prepare for our next release, which will be 1.2, and it's really realistically, it's a step, I think, more substantially towards our 2.0, which is our much larger major release. Something that we have not previously done, but we've talked about for a while, is this kind of contributors page. And so I want to talk through kind of what we have so far and what we're thinking in terms of like looking at precedents from other guides. And then Interpol has been brilliant enough to start trying to crafting up some markdown changes that might help us put a table for the contributor section in our guide. Because a lot of people have gone into making the baseline what it is, and we want to be able to thank them and make sure that we're not missing anyone on the list. So with that in mind, I think this is kind of what I've got on the profiling end for today. Was there anything on the agenda that folks were expecting or that we want to make sure makes it on the list? If not, I think we can probably go to the deprecation update. So the last profiling call that we had some back and actually, I think we've talked about it now for 2 profiling calls, some back and forth around the tobacco use and smoking status. Like, do we withdraw it? When do we withdraw it? How do we make the decision that it's too use case specific or not use case specific enough? And we kind of landed on a pending motion to remove it, but wanted to have the underlying kind of governance and like protocol in place, because we've not really hit a lot of items where we've had to make the decision in the past whether or not to formally remove them. And so the update from our last governance call was, we took a look at actually, what are the options available to us, whether it's deprecation or withdrawal or, straight removal, and what do those mean from like an HL7 and an ANSI perspective, both HL7 V2 and FHIR. And just tried to look at, some of the pattern that we've seen in play with the base specification and with, surrounding specs. And really talked about, the options that we have as more of a continuum that is dependent on the kind of artifacts you're targeting, whether it be like a profile or an element or entire spec, but that it's primarily continuum based on, what you choose at what time based on an artifact's maturity. And in our case, one of the primary kind of anchor points was whether or not content had previously been formally published, essentially circulated, validated, and published as a formal artifact that has a degree of stability in folks' minds. So we, I think, have a pretty good preliminary consensus on kind of where we're at right now and how that should impact which of the options we should choose. I think folks, when we were giving the example against our smoking status profile, were kind of keen to say, this is not this isn't officially published content because we haven't gone to ballot. We haven't published the content yet. But we wanted to make sure we kind of nailed down and documented the finer details on the approach. So I know there's some outstanding discussion and decisions that folks want to have on how do we tie or how do we measure or put bounds around the cycles between when you deprecate something, you basically notify the community as it was something that, is no longer in use and potentially has been replaced with something that's a preferred alternative. And when you formally withdraw it from the spec, I think there's some outstanding discussion and decision points on you know, whether or not that's something that we want to go from a chronological perspective or a release perspective. So if that's something that matters to you, definitely come to the next governance call. And then I think the biggest thing was just making sure that we actually had documentation of like, where did we land and what was the rationale? Because it's going to actually be a guide for how we're going to apply this moving forward if we have decisions that we need to make on, you know, removal of profiles or removal of guide content or, you know, changes in decision making in future releases. So I'd say stay tuned. Everything that we've discussed in the governance to date, I think, is in alignment with the suggestion from the profiling call 2 weeks ago to remove the smoking status profile. I think the finer details are just going to help us guide whether or not it's going to be something that, you know, when do we remove it, and you know, how do we communicate it in the larger picture of our protocols. Were there any questions on that, or like anything I missed that was kind of like a major item that has gone into that discussion?
So the tobacco use is part of PSCA, right?
Yep.
And we actually have it earmarked for being part of the next iteration of CDI. So because core is going to have those use cases in it. So if our goal is for baseline to be use case agnostic, it would make sense to deprecate it.
Yeah, and I think like for a number of reasons, also even if it was going to be a while for us to have like a more use case specific place for that profile, I think one of the things that we want to drive some of our principles around is like, you know, can we gauge whether or not something is too use case specific to begin with, just from a baseline decisioning perspective. So I think, you know, I would say like stay tuned on the finer details, but I anticipate that we'll likely be seeing the removal in 1.2 based on what I heard from the conversations last week. All right. The only thing I was going to mention is like, you know, are these discussions that you guys are having like in your own spaces where you have to kind of come up with your own protocols for when you decide to remove something or deprecate something, and, you know, how much notification do you give to your implementers? Like, are these the types of conversations that you guys are having in your own implementation guide spaces?
Haven't run into that with our IGs, but we've run into it with like V2, V3 stuff.
Yeah. And what, like, your experience on like the V2, V3, like it's echoed in a lot of like the recommendations and the practices that have been being put forward, like that we discussed last week, right?
Yeah, and I mean, our biggest issue is the fact that stuff we were deprecating was already in use by some places, so we had to allow for a pathway to maintain stuff working and then direct towards future use to not use those components. And so that gave us our pathway. But what we're looking at with our FHIR stuff right now, we're not that far advanced yet. So it's somewhat easier, but we should have a plan long term for it.
Yeah, but are you talking about having deprecation rules as part of an overall backwards compatibility strategy, or are you talking about during a trial use?
Actually, during production use, not trial use, we found an issue that we had to fix.
No, but this is a trial use specification.
Right. So this, what we're looking at here is a trial use. So it's easier at this point because we don't have anybody fixed into it, right? So that's what I'm saying. There's two phases. You need to go handle this trial use phase where it's easier to take stuff out. You don't have to worry so much. And even once we've got stuff past that, where it's into the real use stuff, we may end up deprecating something because something new comes along or whatever. We need to have a strategy for handle it in both cases.
Right, but you're talking implementation, not standards development. From a standards development perspective, this document is STU, right?
This one is, yeah. That's what I said.
So there is no backwards compatibility requirement, and therefore
it depends on the level of the element, though, right? Because if we've had something in here get past that high enough level, then you do need to worry about backwards on it because we said it's more or less stable.
Do you have anything in FMM4?
I don't know.
We don't. And like, I think the question that I originally posed is like, are you guys having these types of conversations for any of your, like your own FHIR implementation guides or specs? And I think Randy had said, Well, we haven't really gotten there with FHIR yet because of that same level, like similar to the baseline, a lot of the content that's being developed, implementation guides in Canada and FHIR are still not quite at that FML M4. So I think it's going to like the conversations that we're having in the context of the baseline will be helpful for when folks do eventually have to have those own conversations about, you know, their content as it becomes more stabilized. Like if you have a jurisdictional implementation guide in FHIR, for example. But I think all we can kind of do is glean from people's experiences and what we're seeing in the standards community around V2, V3, and the guidance that we have in FHIR, and try to apply that to our processes in the baseline, and hope that we, I think, learn from the experience for when the time comes in our own implementation guides at the jurisdictional and implementation level.
Yeah, and that's where my suggestions come in, is like, we're at this point, we don't have to be so rigorous, but we do need to plan for that future state. And it's really, now's the time to make that plan, since we're already thinking about it.
And I liked, one of the things that I liked, so that Elliot had brought up in the last conversation. So we're having this conversation in the context of the baseline and kind of trying to follow as best practices as we can find. But Elliot made a really good point last week around, trying to actually similarly have a protocol for any HL7 Canada produced specification, so that there is that kind of forward thinking plan and a clear kind of set of rules in place for any content that's developed this way. So we keep marching along. That's, I mean, I don't think on the profiling end, there's a ton that we have to do on our end, besides the participating in the closure of this conversation around, like some of those finer grained details at our governance calls. But we're going to hold off on removing the actual smoking status from the list of profiles until, we get kind of end closure on the conversation. So the other topic I have on the agenda. Oh, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm late to the discussion, but I'm confused about that. So if a profile is being used for admission of a patient to some facility, or not even admission, simply covering patient information inside, I don't know, someone's got to buy glasses. What's the relevance of this? What's the requirement for this?
I'm not sure I fully understand. Can you expand on that?
There's limited use cases where smoking status is appropriate, so why would it be bound on everything?
Oh, I think I think that is largely the rationale to date for why we're considering it not appropriate for continuation in the baseline. So basically, the discussion 2 weeks ago on the profiling call was, hey, we've got this smoking status profile. It kind of sticks out like a sore thumb because we have other profiles in the baseline that are really focused on reuse, that are use case agnostic, condition, patient, allergy, medication requests, things that are going to be used a bunch of different ways, that don't necessarily that aren't tied to really kind of more narrow workflows. But when we were doing our review and we were finding, we have some issues to resolve around the smoking status profile, it drove a larger question around, hey, did we miss the mark in thinking that this was actually use case agnostic when it isn't?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having drawn from US Core, US Core was use case specific.
Yes, and that's why I think that's what drove its original inclusion, and the kind of realization that we've had in the last few sessions around talking about it, that it's like it slipped in from that perspective, but not everything that we inherited from US Core will be upheld to that same use case agnosticism that we've put into the other profiles.
But have you looked at the other elements inside what you inherited from US Core to also remove its, like smoking
Yes.
status is an easy one to spot.
Yep.
The terminology used with diagnosis may not be so easy to spot.
Yeah, so actually we did I would say a considerable amount of effort through a process called the due diligence review in basically through 2021 through 2023, where what we were doing was we were going through each of the profiles and then an element by element level, trying to actually find guides in Canada in FHIR that explicitly didn't have those elements. So we were trying to make the case that like, hey, we're finding a pattern where we have this constraint where when we actually look at implementations that span a variety of use cases, it's not consistently applied. And therefore, it may not actually be appropriate to say that's a use case agnostic rule. So that piece has been done, but at from like the higher level profile level, I think the smoking status one is has been a bit of an oddball.
Okay, and by looking only at things already done in FHIR, it means we'll bang into the stuff that isn't done in FHIR.
Yep, and to have like secondary processes and like for people to raise the community issue log items and to raise like cases when something isn't needed for a particular workflow, even if we don't have the evidence from a FHIR profile in Canada for that.
Yeah, because most of what we do is not in fact in FHIR, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
is there an upcoming ballot?
well, that's what we're pushing for. So I put this at the beginning of the meeting. Our current track is we've just put out in the last month, you know, a minor bug fix. We're now making changes in the profiling calls towards 1.2 with a goal of shortly after, particularly when we make some new changes to our canonical URL and do some of the finer detail cleanup, to have 2.0 be our target for ballot. So
Okay, and are we which ones of these are being balloted?
the intent is 2.0.
Okay.
But the
Because
whole
if we-
package, right?
What's that?
All of CA baseline.
Correct. Yep. Because folks were queasy about putting something out to ballot before we had a canonical URL change. So they didn't want to put anything before that. And, you know, risk essentially having folks be confused when in the future 2.0 they saw that things were hosted at a different canonical.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So our big focus has been 1.2 and trying to get through our QA log for like, these are errors and breaking problems. A lot of our problems have been in the invariant space, and we've gotten through the decisioning on, I think, almost all of them. One of the things that I have on the list today is like the actual application of one of them that I think you guys talked about maybe 2 or 4 weeks ago. I think Mike was facilitating that day.
Yep.
And it's just actually like going through and applying some of the modifications. I think this one is probably a 2 or a 3-part fix, but I figure we can walk through it together. That way we know it gets actually applied. We ensure it's applied to like the desire, and it's a chance for us to also become more comfortable as a community with invariants as we trial out refinements that fix problems that I think that lack of comfortability drove in the first place. So this is the one I have for today for us to kind of walk through. I'm going to try to leave some time at the end to talk through the contributor section, but I have effectively, let me see if I can pull up the original issue that this is driven from, which is 2493, which we haven't closed out yet because we've been making our way through it, is driven from our Canadian baseline QA file, right? So Elliot, angel that he is, went through and identified any of the errors, logged tickets for them, and we've just been kind of making our way through them. And he's grouped the ones that are invariant related, and we've been working through those as a group. So we've applied the changes for allergy, and I think one of the changes for, let's see if I have it, allergy, and I think, oops, let's make it up. Allergy, and I think it's observation results. And there's an outstanding one that we need to apply on observation results for today. So I'm going to put these side by side if I can. So let's see. This guy down here. I have our observation results profile. The modification that I've made to it is I just modified the date while I was getting my environment prepped. And where's this guy off? So we'll take a look at it together and then we'll modify it and make sure that this is making sense as we go through it. And we'll run it through IG Publisher and make sure that it resolves the errors that we're looking at. So the motion was twofold. It was to remove the duplicative modeling. So we had a fixed value on quantity system. And that piece might have been removed. Let me actually just see. This is observation results. I wish I had this guy up, then I could actually see. All right, so it looks like I don't know when it occurred, but I'm just looking for like the actual fixed value. Oh, here it is, fixed URI. Okay. So we said the first part of it is to remove the fixed URI because effectively what we have is an invariant and a fixed URI that are both saying it has to be system. And then this, well, I should say it's three parts. The third was then relax the underlying thing that is forcing it to be UCOM back to an error. And the third, which was, I think, more typographical, which is fix the actual application of it and make sure that the syntax is correct for what we're looking for. So I'm going to just zoom in so you can actually see. This was like how it was originally modeled, right? You've got like this value. It's sliced to say, here are the rules if it's a codable concept, and here's the rules if it's a value quantity. And under value quantity, we said there's two distinct rules. The first one's an invariant. It's forcing you to use UCOM. The second is a fixed value. It's forcing you to use UCOM. So they do the same thing. Because we wanted to go with I think a slightly more like loosened expectation that it was a warning rather than an error, the group had decided to like forego the actual fixing as the option moving forward and instead to use invariant as basically a way to say, hey, we really want this and we're gonna give you a note, but it's not gonna be a hard fail. Okay, so for folks that are watching, I've just removed the fixed URI, which is the one that we're referring to right here. And the part in the motion, which is here.
So just to get clear from just what your business intent is, as opposed to the formalism to express it, do you want to say that they must send coded information?
The business intent is to encourage the use of UCOM when they send a quantity value, but to not create a conformance issue if they don't send UCOM with a quantity of a data type.
Okay, so UCOM is preferred, not required.
Effectively.
Yes.
Okay.
And when we're fixing it, it's another way of saying, oh, that's required, and that isn't.
Well, yeah, then the fixed URI would also require that value. So that is definitely wrong.
Yeah.
So the expression allows you to provide that
Flexibility, yeah. So we're going to remove that fixed URI there. And the constraint itself, I'm going to move up the constraint before we modify it. So one of the consistent patterns that we got caught up on that we had a bunch of errors in our QA log for was the application of the actual kind of expression when we were trying to target two elements or sub-elements being too far down the chain. So this is another example where one of the fixes that we have to apply is actually to bring it up to the next level up so that it can target both system and value.
Okay, sorry, do you mind scrolling to the right on that expression? Because
and actually what I might do is just see if I can do this word wrap real quick.
Put it where you want it to be.
Yeah, okay, so let me see.
Okay.
That's the one I removed. And then I'm going to pull it because this one refers to both value and system.
Well, don't you want the warning if the system is not units of measure, as opposed to warning when it is?
So this one would be a warning if value exists, then the expectation is that system exists with unit of measure.
But that's not what it says.
So
I mean, what
it's-
it says is where it's units of measure and there's a value, you'll generate an error. I think what you want to do is both change your severity from error to warning, but also where the value quantity dot system is not equal to units of measure and there's a value. That's when you want to issue the warning, isn't it?
when there's a value and the system does not equal units of measure.
Right. Whereas currently says equals units of measure.
I think it's just it's more like a double negative, but my understanding is that this expression still accomplishes that, where if we were reading it backwards, where value quantity value exists, then and value quantity system exists. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, let me just first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move it just so that
Okay.
we don't lose that part, and then we'll. All right, I'm pretty sure I'm going to apply it here because my hope is that if it's applied on the slice that's like typed against the data type, it can still transverse into value and system and I don't have to bring it higher.
Do you even need the slice?
If we are trying to, let's see, if we don't use the slice, let me take a look at the actual thing again. If we don't use the slice, we are still going to be able to target a data type in this case. And we're nominating the system. So even if it is a codable concept, will that mess with, does anyone know if we apply this at the topmost level and we don't actually slice because our invariants both target, our invariants are written to target by the data type, will it mess it up because codable concept is expecting coding system as opposed to quantity, which just goes directly to system?
Yeah, I think you say value dot
Of type.
as quantity or of type quantity.
Yeah, this is what we had said last time about how we would do the codable concept one. So I think we do the same for of quantity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy this real quick. And we're going to keep this one here, and then we're going to modify it to see if we can kind of clean it up, and then we can decide if we can bring it up higher. Okay, so where is it still? Where?
Yeah, it's value dot of type.
Oh, here we go. Of type quantity.
No, wait.
No,
No, the parenthesis goes back, but value dot of type.
Okay. And we need like joining statements here, right? And the quantity system equals units of measure.
Not equal. I'm pretty sure you want not equal.
Well, actually, hold on. I think let's start with the first half, which is where value of type is quantity and value exists implies
Right.
this.
Right. Then if it's not units of measure, you issue a warning.
Yep. And so how do we target? So basically we're saying first thing is we're targeting if it comes through as a quantity what's my joining statement to say and quantity value exists? So that's how I write it out as like a business term, but I'm actually not sure that this is going to work. We can play around with it in the FHIR path tester.
So why we need a where value dot type quantity there? That's been constrained under this layer already, which is the type code column quantity already.
If we're slicing it.
Yes, but this constraints under the slice, and also with the pair constraint under the type code column quantity already. So just like I'm in the house, and then I said, if I were in the house, and blah, 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 and we are in the house.
So you're proposing if we were to keep it on value quantity slice.
Well, we can, but I mean that it's kind of I won't say it's kind of overkill actually. And actually, this if you express in this way, actually this FHIR path can be put outside the scope here.
You're saying outside of the slice. I think that's what Paul's saying too.
I might have different opinion because this slicing focus on value quantity, and not a slice focus on the codable concept. And I'm not sure this constraint also will apply to the codable concept that is slice or not. That's the question.
Let's write it so that we can try to nominate to begin with. Like, let's see if we can write it so that it could be flexible enough to be applied outside of the slice. So if we are targeting of type quantity, the next thing that we would have to do is put together the next statement, which would be and a value exists. And so when I'm using this value of type, is it as simple as saying and value dot exists like this?
Sorry, I think. Oh, in the human expression as opposed to in the XPath.
Well, I guess like in the XPath, if I've got my join statement, right?
Well, the XPath is the next thing down, right?
Oh, sorry, in the FHIR path.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna get my FHIR.
Okay, so if it's quantity and value exists, yeah, I think that's right.
Implies system.
If you take a look at your expression up above, it's a value quantity dot value dot exists. So where those two things both exist.
I don't think you need the where.
Because you're wanting your Boolean to end out non-zero.
So you're saying remove the where.
Remove the where?
What is the where adding?
Just the execution of the expression. Think.
Doesn't that provide part of the targeting where those conditions match? Then you want to do something?
Should we try it with the where with the
Okay,
where and without
exists.
where?
Yeah, but just a second. But you want to bring the quantity and the second expression together into one, right?
Yes.
So you want to and those two things, but you want the result of the and. So I put another set of parentheses around that.
This.
One to the left and one to the right of the exists. dot exists.
You're saying dot exists like this to add it?
Yeah, and that way you're now getting a true or false.
So this would be true, implies,
So you get the true and true. The evaluation of that expression is going to be true or false. And the exists is essentially an if.
let's see if we can try it. Let's see. So I've got this. I'm
think you
in
can-
FHIR Lab.
I think you can just do value of type quantity dot value exists. But try running this.
All right, we'll try that this way and then we'll run it. Okay. Let me grab a R4 observation example real quick. And we want something with quantity, CO2 quantity, let's see. This guy. Okay, so first one is it's something that has a quantity and unit of measure system. So this should evaluate to true if we've written this correctly. I'll expand out my results. Just not liking something about it. Let me try my other FHIR path tester on here. Okay. Binary implies invocation exists failed. They only appear at the root of the document. So this is in there. This is in there.
That casts, that says use value quantity if it exists, if it's there.
So you're saying it should be like this, Elliot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dot exists, and then get rid of the second part of the. Keep going.
I don't actually, do I need this parentheses if we do it this way? I don't think I do. It's just an if then.
We're going to run into problems on the second half because somehow we need to qualify system, but yeah.
So we're trying, the way we had it before was value quantity system. Let's try that. Invocation built-in children failed. Invocation of type failed. Resource type name may only appear at the root. So it doesn't like this.
No, I think it might resource type name. Does this let us specify where this is being invoked on?
Not through the UI. I think you have to actually make a claim here. Because in this one, you can select your resource, right?
Yeah, the context expression up above or on the right there.
Let's try this one. Okay, so this is, we're getting somewhere. We're at least getting a true. In your piece online in the chat, Elliot, you were saying value of type quantity system instead of this way, right? So you were typing it using of type instead of value quantity here. Let's just see.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna try to remove this real quick and see if we can get it to evaluate to false the way we have it, and then we'll keep tweaking it. So we got a true. Now we want to see if we can get it to evaluate to false if the rule isn't met. So I'm removing the system, which was UCOM. I don't get any, normally I at least get a false. Let me try. Okay, so it needs the system to be populated in order for this to evaluate to anything. So then let's try to improve this and try the observation. I'm following what you put in the chat. Dot value dot of type quantity system as an end. All right. So right now we know that's evaluating to false. Let's see if that turns to true when we have units of measure. All right, this is looking better. So value of type. So when something with type quantity has a value, it's going to imply the next statement has to also be true, which is value, observation value that is a quantity and has a system is units of measure. So if I remove it entirely, we'll get a false. Or we didn't get anything that time. So it works if you submit the wrong, if you're submitting a system, but it isn't this one, it works. But it doesn't work if system is missing altogether.
Yeah. Okay. Where did you find this observation?
Just the example, I think it was the CO2 example, yeah, on the base spec for R4.
Is it? Hi, is it because you have of type quantity dot value exists? So it's kind of stopping there and just saying if value quantity dot value is available, then it'll evaluate whether that's there, and it'll kind of not. It's not really looking at the next line. I could be wrong though, but I just
May try to bracket the whole phrase before the imply, put the where at the very top to make a collection.
Yeah.
So like this. So where? Like that, Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's looking good. Let's see what happens when we remove it.
And you want to make it a universal, yeah, this right now is universal, may change observation, I'm not sure this. And so you can put into this observation, a dollar this, sorry. But anyway, that's this minor, you don't need to worry about it. You can put a dollar this, yeah, in the future.
But that won't remove the, well, that won't resolve the issue where if system is missing, this doesn't evaluate to anything, right?
The value is, once the missing, you mean the system missing?
Yeah, sorry, if the system is missing. So it works if we put something, so if I did this like example. So if someone populates something in this and it's not units of measure, it can pick up on it. But if it's populated or if it's just missing entirely and there's no system, then it actually can't evaluate this because there's like some dependency where it's saying both of these things.
And put the extra dot system exist. Combine, imply, and, right? You put the system
So-
exist and equal. Not after imply, sorry. Or maybe before the imply. Oh, sorry, before the imply, sorry. Sorry, just a little bit of kind of muddy my mind. Is it?
Inside the brackets before the implies.
Yep.
Right there.
So you're saying we're making it like twofold. So if this it exists, it implies a system exists.
I'm more lean to after implies get an extra parts
Maybe you
of
need to,
that value dot system exist and dot system equal. That's the two after sorry, after, not before, sorry. This is my thought.
Like this.
But after implies. Well, this is actually the first the first half phrase is right.
Mhm.
And we implies first dot system should exist. And second, dot system should equal to the specific value. There's two different to logic entity should be implies.
So it implies it
Yeah.
exists and
Yep. And a bracket whole as one sorry, it's entity I call it. Sorry, it's the
Yeah.
wrong word. Term.
like that.
so is this too strong though? So if it's a quantity, is there ever a scenario where they're supplying value and we don't? And we think that, well, it's still going to be a warning. So basically, if you are sending us a quantity, you send us a value, yes, it should have a system, and yes, that system should be units of measure.
Yeah, but shall it have a value? Oh, sorry, shall it have a system? Or are you tolerant of it not having a system?
I think forcing it to have a system is more intolerant than what we originally started with. And we said that we originally thought we were too strong in our expectation to fix the URI.
So I think what happens is if this expression fails, then the warning or error of the constraint gets raised. If this expression is true, the constraint is good and nothing gets said.
And so if it's a warning, I think that's fine.
Well, this is going to fail if there is no system.
Right.
I had accidentally in here that I didn't like. Message extraneous input. Oh, I think it's because it doesn't like this.
Yeah, you need to copy paste all those inside. Observation, dot of value, dot of type.
Okay, so I'm going to copy this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to check whether or not this does what we want. So basically, right now, this observation has a quantity with a value and a system is missing. It flags because we're seeing false. We're going to check that it flags or it says true when the behavior that we desire occurs, because that is necessary. System is this units of, I don't think I messed that up, did I?
I mean, your system dot exist doesn't include the full path.
Oh, observation.
Observation value of type quantity. I think
Oh, where's typing going?
there's a risk here that if you have two quantity values, it may pick up the value from one and the system from the other.
In that manner, that will be true. Because this collection.
Let's take a look at observation real quick. So you're saying you can only have one value, but are you saying if you just supply,
Multiple codes.
but I don't know if you
You
can.
can only have one value. Can you? Yeah, you're right. You can only have one value. Okay, my mistake.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good check.
If it was on component, this would be a problem.
Okay, so what we've checked so far is that this evaluates to true, which means it wouldn't flag an error if the unit of measure is there. We're gonna try example.org, and our hope is that this works to evaluate to false. It does. And we're gonna try to remove system and hope that it also evaluates to false, and it does. So this, I think, is a viable invariant to enter in to our profiles, but I see, Elliot, there was one other thing you wanted to try in the chat. Did you want to try this one? If I save this one, where is that?
Yeah, if you don't mind, it's basically just pulling the observation value of type outside.
Okay. So value of type, quantity. So you're saying dot where? Okay, so you're removing the where.
Yeah.
System.
And this would be system exists and system equals such and such.
I think we need an observation system, right? Or
No,
observation.
I
No?
think the observation value of type will put the scope of the valuation of where to be that element. I think.
Is this so?
No, you need the closing on the where.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Where value exists.
Open close that. No, that was not.
Don't close it there.
No, after the org. Yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Hmm.
Ooh, interesting. Well, then that's not. Oh, what this is doing is it's selecting the observation value of type quantity that has a value and a system of this.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. You could add on a exists to the end of that.
All right. We're going to try our test again. So that evaluated to true. This should evaluate to false. And this should evaluate to false. What are the, so I'm going to pull these next to each other. Do we think that one or more of one of these is going to be more flexible if we wanted to remove our slicing in the long term? Like, are there pros and cons of one versus the other?
Well, are you requiring that logic throughout, or do you want to restrict that logic?
Are you saying like, are you requiring the value quantity be set? I think we want it to only apply when the value is of quantity type. And my hope was that this and this do this.
Right. And in all circumstances where it's a quantity type, right?
And it's an observation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I would not, then what are the other slices?
There is one on codable concept to enforce the supply of code and system. I think we can return to the question of like, do we want to remove the slices at our next call? But I think the bigger question that I have is like, does one of these provide any benefit over the other? Or are they effectively, they allow us to do the same with the same, you know, low risk?
Okay, we're observation quantity or volume to time. Well, the second one is certainly cleaner. But it also requires that someone understands implies. That's really your only difference, right? Well, actually, you implied in the first one.
Yeah, my only fear of not knowing is whether or not by not making the statement about quantity system, if this is gonna have any wonky behavioral impacts. Should I maybe put a note in this and maybe because it's top of the hour, like,
Yeah.
should we play around and see if we can throw a couple different examples at this that are like non-related? Like, let's throw an example that has like a quotable concept and see against both of these for the next session and see if they both perform the same way.
I think that would be helpful.
You can do that, but my gut feeling is the first one's better because it makes it clear where you're targeting. And you don't hit accidental targets.
Yeah, and I think that like my hope is that like if we throw a bunch of examples at it, we'll be able to determine like, are we actually getting accidental targets here?
Yeah.
Us with additional non-quantity examples. All right, I'm going to save this and I just won't run it until the next time that we talk. All right, well, we still didn't get to talk about the contributors section. What I'm going to do in the meantime is I'm going to put, if folks want to have a look at it before we talk about it next, basically, Interpol has put together an updated index markdown file that has a table structure with some initial entries. We want to, at one of the next profiling or governance calls, go through that and make sure, hey, this is how we want to organize this, and this is the way we're comfortable with the sections. And we've got everyone that we want to like list, and the logic for that makes sense. But if you want to do your homework and take a look at it ahead of the call, please do. And then we'll have a conversation about it probably at our next governance and profiling call. That's just the poll request, which was the last link I put in the email or put in the chat. With that in mind, I will see many of you next week. Have a wonderful weekend.